How you going? In this video we'll have a look at harmonic numbers, but one particular column of those and how much knowledge they contain, but also the connections through various civilizations, across time, across the world. I'll put a link in the description because I've got a 108 video. That will be in the description. I'll go into that into a little bit more length and show again sacred architecture from the ancient through to the most modern of modern elements of our society, even including, well, the electronic age. It's still being used, very powerful, of course, but will upset some. But anyway, so we have this column here. So these are the harmonics, various now 27, 54. I could go into them, but I'm going to start at 108. So we have this column 108, 216, 432, 864. So 108. Really powerful, very important number, again, cross time, cross cultures, across the world. More than a few sites, so if you do 108 number properties, 108 meaning, you'll find, again, how often it appears. It's not coincidence. It cannot be in the infinite sea of numbers, as they say. These apparently separate, independent cultures always come back to all the same weights and measures and the same very important symbolic numbers, and 108 is an important one, but also, well, just because of the nature of things. But for instance, 108, 1 plus 0 plus 8 equals 9. 216, 2 plus 1 plus 6 equals 9. 432, 4 plus 3 plus 2 equals 9. Now you'll find this continues. Now 864, 8 plus 6 plus 4 equals 18, but 18, 1 plus 8 equals 9. This is got to do with Harshad numbers and what's called recreational number theory. It's interesting point, but basically what it means, 108 divided by 9 equals 12. 216 divided by 9 equals 24. What happens is that any multiple of 9, so okay, now we'll just have a look at this column. So that's 9. Okay, so 9 times 2 is 18. 1 plus 8 equals 9. 36. 3 plus 6 equals 9, 72, 7 plus 2 equals 9. If you multiply any number by 9, the digits will then reduce back to 9. So that's why this happens, and there's more to it, but anyway, 108, it's basically a 9 number. Now, for instance, in Eastern tradition, like amongst others, Vishnu has 108 symbols attached to him. There are 108 chakras or pressure points. Sun salutations on the spring equinox in yoga, 108 sun salutations, and the japa mala, which are especially in the Eastern, 108 beads. Very important number. It's built into. You'll find 108 in all the ancient Hindu Buddhist temples. That's one of these important features. But japa mala. Okay, in Buddhism, so the Buddha, when he died, was said to have 108 auspicious symbols on each of his feet, 216 in total, but 108 on each foot. So it's now, for instance, in Wat Pho, again, you'll see the statue bears his feet, 108 symbols, but there are 108 offering bowls. This is another repeated feature. Japanese Buddhism, ring the bell 108 times for New Year. Buddha was once asked 108 questions and he made 108 statements. However, in Far East, in China, for instance, in Chinese literature, you're going to find 108, 108,000. These same will appear over and over, 108 stars of destiny. Interesting, in the Qin dynasty, 1 Li, very important character because he standardized architecture, many social aspects, but weights and measures. And also at that time, exact date I could never be sure of, but since quite a while ago in China, one must walk 10,800 li to reach wisdom. It's interesting that 576 meters, or actually just a fraction under 576 meters, a couple mil from that, is 1,890 feet. That's 1 plus 8 plus 9 is 18. But the diameter of the moon is 1,890 royal miles. Shaolin, same thing. You'll see again these very important, based on 9, 27, 2 plus 7 is 9, 54, same thing, but 108 movements in total. But again, across the world, aspect like weights and measures. So 108 grains, you'll find this in ancient weights and even in the 108 dactyloi. So this has to do with measures of field for tax assessment in the Byzantine Empire. But still with us to this day, a yardstick. Even the word a yardstick is a word you would use, to measure something. Is it truthful? Is it real? The yardstick. But 3 feet is 108 barleycorn. Stacks of timber, 108 cubic feet, so third dimension. But even pipes or butts of wine and beer, 108 gallons. Especially here in Australia, but even full screen, full HD, 1080, you'll see these same harmonic numbers defining screen file sizes just built into it. In Australia especially, FM was defined from 88 to 108 megahertz. You'll see it's slightly different in other regions, but the same thing happens in the AM frequencies because there's a 9 kilohertz separation, and so again, all the harmonic numbers will appear on your AM dial, here in Australia especially. But ancient legends, so we go back to the Epic of Gilgamesh and this, the flood story. Basically, it was the origin. So Noah's flood is a direct, exactly the same. It's including the dove and the raven being released. This will also connect to the Manu and the flood story in India, for instance. But throughout the descriptions of the Epic of Gilgamesh, from the size to the elements, how much pitch bitumen was put into the construction, even how much oil and was stored on, for instance. But again, the descriptions 108, 108, it's just repeated consistently. But even you'll find that, so New Jerusalem, which in itself, so New Jerusalem is either 12,000 stadia, older versions, King James Bible's 12,000 furlongs each edge length, and 120 cubits is the description of the Ark of Utnapishtim, also called the Preserver of Life. So again, because of this, basically it's built on 12s, you'll find that 108 or 108,000 are the edge length, but even when you convert to the Royal Babylonian system of weights and measures, the edge, each individual edge is 108, and 7 zeros on the end. And again, it just appears again, cross time, cross cultures, they're embedding this particular number. If it was sort of random and they weren't, and they were independently developed cultures, and it just wouldn't happen. It wouldn't happen, but it does. It can be weighed, it can be measured, it can be tested, it's repeated, not just in more solid weights and measures, but also in the symbolism, mythology, ritual, that type of thing as well. Very important. The quadrivium: arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. So of the 7 liberal arts, the ancient system of education, the quadrivium most important, because these are also very much connected to Hermeticism, weights and measures, and how they harmonize these harmonic numbers, incorporate geometry, arithmetic, music, and astronomy. And for instance, in geometry, why is 108 so important? Well, for instance, we begin with a triangle, so 300 degrees. Well, that there are 60 minutes per degree and 60 seconds per minute, so that's again 108, defining the outside of a triangle. Whether it's a square, whether it's a rectangle, any 4-sided poly, you've got to find that if you add the outside angles together, a square would be 270 times 4, 1080, 108 again. So the vesica, all important vesica, because it's a 4-sided, the rhombus on the inside, it's 4 sides, and so that's going to bring you to 1080 degrees again. Octagon, the inside angle, 8 of them, 135 times 8, same number. The pentagon and pentagram, so 108 degrees, you'll find that through, again, one of the key defining angles of the pentagon and the pentagram is 108, but also has the pentagon and pentagram relates to phi, or the golden number, the divine proportion. Even in trig, you'll see how this connects to phi, the golden number. Again, just, I know you could, or even the other angles, so for instance 36 and 72, Same thing happens again with the golden number coming to these things, and these are the numbers, not just harmonic numbers, because for instance, okay, 36, 3 plus 6 is 9. These are all on that harmonic chart, 36, 72, 7 plus 2 is 9. And this has to do with a 360-degree compass. But even, well, 30 degrees, and the pendulum from the 1 second, 1 meter long pendulum, how it connects to the Egyptian royal cubit, and pi over 6 radian, and again, just beautiful, 86,400 seconds per day. We'll come to that. So 30 degrees, well, that's 108,000 seconds on the compass. So across geometry, even time, weights and measures, very, very hermetic, 108. In arithmetic, again, so 108, you see, lovely number there. Same thing happens again. Harshad, numbers, recreational number theory. Beautiful number again in cross dimensions. And in astronomy, well, for instance, if I multiply the diameter of the moon times 108, I get essentially spot on, very, very close to the average distance from the moon to the Earth. 108 of the moon's diameter is the distance Earth to moon. But in this long foot, or otherwise sometimes called the Persian foot, the diameter of the moon itself is 108 once again. So carries on. So interesting that the atomic weight of silver, 108 mole, and by the light of the silvery moon. So 108 is not just a moon number, actually connects many things, but it's a convenient way to think of it as silver or the moon. 108 solar system carries on, but for instance, so we already showed 108 times the diameter of a moon is the distance from the moon to the Earth. Very, very close to being spot on to the average, because of elliptical orbits, these things always change a bit. But if I also multiply the diameter of the Earth times 108, I'm essentially getting above 99.9% probably, but very, very, very close to it. Diameter of the Earth times 108 equals the diameter of the Sun. And if I multiply the diameter of the Sun times 108, I get the distance from the Sun to the Earth. At its top speed, the orbital speed of the Earth, 108,000 kilometers per hour, which is the polar diameter of Saturn, again above 99.95, I think, percent. But even because it's a gas planet, it's not, it's not clear cut where the edge is, and so it's essentially spot on. You could think of it that way. Not quite, so I'll put an asterisk there, but it's 10,800 days for Saturn to orbit, like one Saturn year, 10,800 days, within a very small margin. There are other things need to be taken into account, so I'll put the asterisk on that one. However, if just like the Earth, if I multiply the diameter of the Sun times 1080, I get the distance from the Sun to Saturn. So again, weights and measures, proportions, it's all linking up together. In music, again, you'll see 108 Pythagorean tuning, the pentatonic tuning, 108A. So that's 108. 216, well, there are 21,600 minutes in a 360-degree compass. Of course, by definition, the circumference of the Earth is 21,600 nautical miles. The diameter of the Moon, 2,160 miles. Each age in precession, on average, is 2,160 years. The walls of New Jerusalem, talked about that earlier, how important that is. Well, the walls themselves are 216 feet high. A cube, one of the Platonic solids, 2,160 degrees. And it also appears in the vesica. Now, it's also in the vesica itself, 108, or a few other aspects of that. But 216, these harmonics. And so 108 times 2, 216, 216 times 2, we get 432. What's the diameter of the Sun in the long scale? The Arkavut Napishtim in New Jerusalem also incorporating this number multiple times. Ancient systems, for instance, Roman, 1 ounce, 432 grain. A in the standard tuning, Pythagorean tuning, 432. And the Yugas, so the Kali Yuga, 43,200 years, and even the lifespan of a Manu, 432,0000. Okay, so once again we've gone through 108, 216, 432, the sun, weights, the New Jerusalem, the preserver of life as the Ark of Utnapishtim, the flood, and we also see 432 being represented there in the lifespan of Manu, which was again the Indian flood legend, and the Yugas for 432,000. Now the radius of the sun is 43,200. We'll get to that. Tuning systems, the Pythagorean tuning systems, and the Vestica. So we have the same themes with sun and moon, the New Jerusalem, the flood legends, the Yugas, systems of weights and measure, including music, of course, and well, the Vestica, always the Vestica, and how this just happens to correspond to ancient units of measure. Just happen to convert it, these very beautiful numbers where we get the same repeated theme. So 432, now we double that once again and we get 864. And 864, well, once more, the Yugas, the Vapara Yuga, 864,000 years. Once more, the Vesika, 240 degrees. The outside angle of a rhombus is 864,000 seconds. Again, 864,000. But it extends, okay, so the sun, the earth, the moon, Jupiter, and Saturn. And so, well, 864,000 miles is the diameter of a sun, above 99.9%, but also because of the different techniques on how you define the outside of the sun, and I should say essentially the mean diameter, so the average polar equatorial diameter, I've labeled it equatorial, but really it should be the mean diameter, 86,400 miles. And well, Jupiter again, so the mean diameter of Jupiter, again that should be over there as well, but 86,400 miles, 1/10 of the sun, but there are 86,400 seconds per day. 24 hours breaks down to 86,400 seconds per day, which brings us back to the 1 meter pendulum being 1 second and connects to the Egyptian cubit. We'll come to that in a moment. So that's the size and time. We also have orbital speed. So the orbital speed of the moon, I'm the average, but so we have a minimum and a maximum, and so the moon will travel through that point, 86,400 kilometers a day. And well, back to 864,000. Well, the orbital speed of Saturn, 864,000 kilometers per day. So we see these themes, these repetitions, but while we're on 86,400 seconds per day, let's pause a moment. Okay, so back to the meter pendulum, so it's 86,400 seconds per day. That section of arc is pi over 6 meters, effectively, we've been splitting hairs, 1 Egyptian royal cubit, and that 30-degree angle, the pyramid itself is, Heliopolis is 30 degrees north of the equator, so again, 108. But this 86,400 seconds per day, and well, if we look at the pyramid, so it's a three-dimensional object. If we stand at the northeast corner, especially, because that's the most, it would apply across the pyramid, but this is the most accurate corner to describe this. And so we have, it's a pyramid, not a triangle and a square, and so standing at the corner, the most you'll ever see of the pyramid is 2 sides, and we'll see the height. And well, so including the sockets, the maximum visible base of the pyramid is the rotational speed of the Earth per second. And therefore, if we multiply that by 86,400, we get the equatorial circumference of the Earth equal to, or essentially equal to, the best modern measurements of the size of the Earth. And the equatorial circumference of the Earth, I mentioned earlier, is 21,600 nautical miles by definition. But again, these 108, 216, 432, 864 coming back. So, but that's the equatorial circumference. And so now if you measure the height of a Great Pyramid, including the paving stones, the socle, and multiply that by 86,400 seconds per day, we get the polar diameter of the Earth. So we're describing the whole Earth, so the circumference and the height. And that's So 86,400 seconds per day for meter, for pendulum, for second, all coming together nicely. Now that will blend very, very nicely with these other aspects of it. And so back to, so this is why these numbers are so cool, so important. So it's Sun, Earth and Moon, but we're also going to get quite a bit of other planetary information. So the diameter and the speeds of Jupiter and Saturn. We already saw how Saturn connects to 108 as well, and as the Sun, the Moon and the Earth does too. So that's 108, 216, 432, 864. Now if we multiply by 2 again, staying on this column on the harmonic numbers, 1728. Well, New Jerusalem and the Ark of Utnapishtim, or Preserver of Life, once again, 1728, describing its cubic, so its three-dimensional volume is 1728. The Satya Yuga, 1728, 1,728,000 years. 12 cube, but okay, but again, the Sun and the Moon. So we're getting again these descriptions. So the Temple of Man, especially connected with flood, the Ark of Utnapishtim and the Yugas, the cycles of destruction. The Manu, current Manu, as it described, was the survivor of the flood, just the same way that Utnapishtim, the ancestor of Gilgamesh, survived the flood with the Ark. Just like the Manu, he had 7 sages to repopulate the earth. He also carried 7 vessels of seed to renew the crops as well. And again, in the long scale and in chains. Now, one chain is 66 feet or 4 poles / perch. Did a recent video on how that connects to also, well, again, just extraordinary set of you know, you want to call that coincidence, good on you, but yeah, it just carries through. It's crossing time, crossing cultures. It's being repeated over and over again. Systems of measurement, Sun, Earth, Moon, the planets, the Temple of Man as well, New Jerusalem or Utnapishtim, the flood legends, always coming back to the same themes. And so 1728. And so next one would be 3, 4, 5, 6, 3,456. Well, there we get a nice, we're going to get back to rods or poles or perch, which is 16.5 feet. So one rod is 33 feet divided by 2. The chains, we get the radius of the Sun. We get, on rods, we get the radius of the Moon. And we also get the polar radius of the Earth, Egyptian royal miles, or the royal mile, which is an 8:7 ratio, which has, again, in music theory, has lovely connections to that as well. It always, geometry, arithmetic, astronomy, and music consistently coming back. These ancient systems of measure were designed with some sophistication, but genius is the only way to describe it, because even when you break down the rod or you break down the chain or the royal mile, you will always come back to these very specific sets of numbers which will describe Sun, Earth, Moon, stars, speed, size, proportions in architecture, and musical aspects, but they're lovely numbers in arithmetic. And so that's one aspect. Now 3, 4, 5, 6. Now we multiply that by 2 again, and we get 6,912. Well, Sun, Earth, and Moon described here, and I think this is an interesting point, because when you do for instance, when you do this 108, 216, 432, you can get Sun, Earth, and Moon numbers, but it's more. So the Sun and the Moon are described in their diameter, equatorial diameter, the best way. It's actually mean diameter, but just for just illustrative purposes. But when it gets to the Earth measures, we now have to look at the polar diameter, not across. And that's interesting because, well, as a person standing on the Earth, how do you relate to the Sun and the Moon? You relate to them through the horizon, across, horizontally, as when we have the Earth, we're standing on the Earth, and it goes, well, nicely described, I think, by the polar diameter. So what we have is these harmonic numbers, and each row, each column is full of profound information. So I've just focused on this column, 27, 54, 108, 216, 432, and Well, there's a, just do a quick review. You'll see like weights and measures, especially connected to well, the Temple of Man or the Holy City and the legends of the flood of Utnapishtim or the Manu in India, the quadrivium being the basics of these. And so geometry, arithmetic, music, and astronomy, time, proportion, it really is all here. And with this very simple system, you get a really, you learn a handful of numbers and you've memorized so much important information in a very simple way. And it's just still staggering to me. Like the school system that I went through, we come out the end of it not really knowing anything. Everything we were taught was in this fanatical decimalization where a number wasn't sciencey if it was a whole number. If you wanted to do a measurement, you had to have a couple of digits, a dot, and then a long string of decimal points, and that was sciencey. But anything which was, well, why are some educated in this particular, why is the seven liberal arts, especially the quadrivium, taught in certain schools, but it's not taught to the servile classes, such as myself, and I'm assuming most of you as well. Well, it's part of the dumbing down of the system, and it's also the gatekeepers who, again, you show them a clean number like this, and it's not sciencey, like it's pseudo, it's fringe or whatever. But if I was to show them a random decimal number and say, okay, that's the diameter of a sun, oh yeah, that seems all right. Not that they know that it is, but it just because it looks sciencey, because it's this string of numbers that's hard to memorize. But with these numbers, you're really getting a beautiful system. It's a connected, it's an integrated system, and our ancestors who designed the 12-inch foot and the 360-degree compass, 12 hours per day. This goes back millennia. Now, the exact date on when certain things emerged might be argued, but even at the very youngest, it's 1,000 years old. However, through studying ancient systems of weights and measure and ignoring the pseudo science that I was taught as official science, such as the origin of a foot, the origin of time, that's the fringe. That's not even the fringe stuff. It's just it's based. It's a dogma. It's almost religious. As where this, to show this, so many would accuse you of engaging in some sort of religious pseudoscience, but I really don't. It's a beautiful system, and one of the criticism might be, well, it's only 99.9% accurate. Well, so is everything else, So when the official measurements, if you read the fine print, they're going to have margins of error and all these other aspects in it. Very often when people talk about measure, they don't realize the difficult issues in measurement. So, for instance, if I want to measure a coastline, I could look that up and say, the coastline of this island is 2,000 miles. But that's based on a certain type of measurement. Now, if I was to measure it exactly the same way, but instead of using a 1 meter ruler, I was to use a 1 centimeter ruler, that ruler would now catch more of the little curves in the coastline. And now all of a sudden, the 2,000 mile coastline of this island is now 10 times larger because I'm using a more accurate measuring system. So we have two completely separate, two different numbers, hugely different, yet they're both true because they've both been measured. And well, that's an important point, I think. So if someone criticizes, well, they're rounding off or whatever, well, they're also rounding off because they're not talking about the issues that go with measurement and the complexities. And so often, what a lot of if you do a Google search and you go to the Wikipedia, they'll give you a number, and they'll think, it's on the internet, and so therefore it must be true. But then if you look deeper, you'll see how there is, conflicting information because, for instance, how do I measure the sun? The sun is this big gas bubble with ripple edges. It's not like a clean surface where I can say, here's the surface and there's the atmosphere. It's more complex, and so they have to use approximations to find out, how do we define margin? So there's margins of error, but there's also what could be called margins of definition. This is how I define what the surface of the sun is. Anyway, 864, 108, 432, 1728. It's cross time, cross cultures, built into the solar system, it would seem, in old legends and myths. Anyway, with that, I hope you enjoyed and have a good one.